Vacations are supposed to be a time to relax, a chance to disconnect from the world, to escape from stress. That's exactly what Martha wanted when she booked her first ever solo cruise. She wasn't the adventurous type. She wasn't the kind of person who did things on a whim. But this time she decided to do something different, something for herself. She thought a week at sea, away from work, away from everything, would be good for her. But the moment she stepped onto that ship, she felt it. Something was off. As the days went by, that feeling only got worse, because the deeper she looked, the clearer it became. She wasn't supposed to be there. Martha wasn't what you'd call spontaneous. She had been a high school English teacher for over 20 years, and every part of her life followed a routine. She woke up at the same time every morning. She taught the same classes. She ate at the same diner on weekends, and at night she went home to an empty apartment. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't happy either. She had no husband, no kids, no real social life outside of work. And as the years passed, the loneliness crept in, slowly, quietly, until one day she realized how empty everything felt. That's why she booked the cruise, a one-week trip to the Caribbean. No responsibilities, no students, no lesson plans, just her, the ocean, and peace. At least that's what she thought. Martha had been expecting excitement, maybe even a little anxiety, but as soon as she stepped onto the ship, all she felt was discomfort. It wasn't anything obvious, just a strange pressure in the air, a thickness, like she had walked into a room where people had just been whispering about her. She shook it off and made her way to her cabin. It was small but cozy, with a balcony overlooking the ocean. She told herself she was just nervous, that the feeling would go away once she settled in. But it didn't. That night, Martha decided to eat at one of the ship's restaurants. She found a small table by the window, watching the waves as she picked at her food. That's when she noticed a woman across the room staring at her. An older woman, maybe in her 70s, with short grey hair and pearl earrings. Martha's stomach twisted. She knew that woman. It was Mrs. Perkins, her old neighbor from childhood. But that didn't make sense, because Mrs. Perkins had died almost 10 years ago. Martha felt her breath hitch. Her fingers clenched around her fork. She stared harder, waiting for her brain to correct itself, to tell her she was mistaken. But then Mrs. Perkins smiled and waved, like they'd just seen each other yesterday. Martha turned away, her heart pounding. It's just someone who looks like her, she told herself. A coincidence. But the next day, she saw another one. A man lounging by the pool, flipping through a magazine. He looked so normal, until Martha got closer and recognized him. It was Mr. Lane, her old high school history teacher. She remembered reading about his funeral in the newspaper 15 years ago. And yet, there he was, sitting in a deck chair, sipping a cocktail, alive and well. She started to feel dizzy. Everywhere she went, she saw more and more familiar faces. The bartender, Stephen, an old co-worker who drowned in a boating accident. The couple laughing near the hot tub. Her childhood neighbors who had died in a house fire. Even the captain of the ship looked eerily like her late uncle. It was impossible, but it was happening. Martha locked herself in her cabin, shaking. She grabbed her phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, just static. Then came the knock at the door. Soft at first, then louder, rhythmic, slow. She crept toward it, pulse hammering. "Who's there?" she whispered. No answer. Another knock. Then a voice. "Martha, let us in." Then suddenly she remembered something. The moment she booked the cruise, her computer had glitched. The screen had flickered black. Then it confirmed her trip. And now she understood. She hadn't booked a vacation. She had booked a ticket to the afterlife. This wasn't a cruise for the living. It was a cruise for the dead. And Martha was never supposed to leave. If you enjoyed this cryptic tale, please remember to comment, share, and subscribe. Happy hauntings.